Alrighty, guys, welcome back to Failing Forward. My name is Jared Wunderlich. I'm your host, and with me today is someone that I've known for a few years now, probably nearly 4 years.
Yep.
And we've had a lot of offhanded conversations about whether it be business, entrepreneurship, mindset, but we've never had the opportunity to sit down in a setting like this before. Guys, sitting across from me is Samson Jagoras. He's an entrepreneur, chief strategy officer out of a Fortune 500 marketing and technology company. He's a real estate investor. He's a motivational speaker. And if I'm being completely honest, I think he's going to blow your minds.
Let's not get carried away.
Yeah. Okay. We won't raise the bar too high yet. But in all seriousness, guys, if you have been watching other episodes and you're not a note taker, I think this is the episode to start, because I think there's going to be some good things to jot down while we're having this conversation. But Samson, thank you for being here, man.
You bet, man. I'm pumped. I'm really excited.
Awesome.
Been looking forward to this. The anticipation was killing me. I was only disappointment that I had was I didn't get to be number one.
You can get to be number one. I mean, if you had just the tiniest little bit easier schedule, then maybe could have squeezed you in there. No, man, super stoked to have you here. This is one I've actually been thinking about and visualizing a lot myself, just leading up to this process. And I'm actually glad it took us a little while to get together to do this, because every time I've actually sat down and dedicated some thought to this conversation, it takes me to a new space. I start thinking about some new things that didn't enter my mind before. So cool. It's in a way been a gift for me that we had to wait a little bit. But I know we're going to cover a lot of different details today. So if you don't mind, I do just want to jump right in. Sure. Tell me a little bit about who you are as a motivational speaker, because honestly, this is probably the area of your life I know the least about personally. And I'm very, very interested. One, how you came to doing this. Was this something you knew you always wanted to do, or was this something later in life you discovered you had the capability to do and followed it?
That's a good question. I think it's probably like 5-6 years ago, as I got more experience under my belt, just speaking and talking with people. Mm-hmm. I came to realize that I was pretty good at speaking publicly. I think the hardest part about public speaking is just kind of finding your own voice. There's people that you look up to, that you admire, and they're just really good, right? Mm-hmm. But the thing that they are is they're authentic, right? So, I'm a blue collar kid. I grew up in a lower income family. Money was, really hard to come by. And somehow along the way, have found a ton of success by just, being the hardest worker in the room, right? That's definitely the one thing that I learned growing up. And so my outlook on it is, well, shit, if I can do it, right? Like anybody can do this stuff. You know
Sure.
what I mean? And so, what you just said was kind of mind blowing. I feel pretty honored the way that you introed me, right? I don't think about my life that way, but that happens a lot where people, quote unquote, admire me, right? And it's like, well, wow, that's kind of cool. So clearly there's something that I'm doing that's inspiring other people. And so that just kind of becomes the precipice where you're just like, well, man, breathing life into other human beings is something that gives me a ton of energy. And I tend to I monitor my relationships in the world by the amount of energy that I get out of it, and nothing gets me more jacked up than just seeing somebody else go out and be inspired and motivated and go crush their goals, So everything that I do has always been in this role of, I guess, servitude or leadership in that sense, like a give first kind of mindset. And so, as I've climbed the ranks at the marketing and technology company that I'm a part of, and just, had an opportunity to, I used to speak in front of 5 people to, I've spoken in front of 500 people. It's just amazing, man, to see other people get something out of something that I have to say. So
Absolutely.
Between work and graduations and, speaking to other business professionals and entrepreneurs. It's something that I enjoy a ton. It's something I wish I actually did more of. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I guess you can make a career out of speaking.
Yeah. How long have you been doing it?
It's been 4 years,
okay.
Kind of like off and on. I would really love to make it a full-time gig and do more of that.
Sure.
But it's just, there's other things that I'm more passionate about.
Absolutely.
So speaking is a cool, I guess, addition to everything that I do,
Of course. Honestly, the reason I wanted to start there is that's a huge source of inspiration for me as well. I actually was arguably the worst public speaker that has ever walked this earth. I took public speaking my freshman year of college. And even prior to that, like when you did do the presentations in school, like with you make a whiteboard of like things glued to it. Like I would get so nervous for those and stuttery and shaky that it was just the most anxiety ridden 5-10 minutes of my life. And I was the exact same way in college when I had to do it for a class.
Yep.
Literally to the point where like the podium was shaking because I was like gripping it so hard and stuttering. And I don't know really what the moment was for me, but I hit a point where I was like, I suck at this. And one day I don't want to.
Yeah.
And that was really probably the first time in my life where I forcibly introduced reoccurring stressful situations for the sake of improving.
Yep.
And what I love about it for me personally is that it taught me the value of stress. It taught me the value of anxiety. That's something specifically that does kind of get brushed under the rug. People don't genuinely like to reveal that that's something they struggle with.
Well, yeah, being uncomfortable is not something we generally.
We're not super attracted to it.
Yeah.
But we also like we it's something we just kind of almost try to ignore. We avoid it with everything in us. But for me, this was the indicator that showed me that progress can come from stress. Progress can come from being in those uncomfortable situations. And I'm nowhere near where you are. I haven't taken it to the point where I've gotten up in front of crowds of, upwards of 500 people. But I will actively seek out opportunities to do so. Like if someone asks me to speak at a wedding, I get so excited for that stuff. Like that's one of my favorite things in the world, because you get to speak about people you love, one,
right.
and two, you're speaking to people you love as well. So that's one of my favorite things ever. If I have an opportunity to speak, in work related scenarios, I jump at the opportunity, even if I don't yet know what I want to talk about. I just know like, I'll figure that part out. Like just get my name out there and know that the opportunity is coming, because I know it's another opportunity to get better. So that was honestly why I wanted to just see where you came from. That.
I mean, I think we tend to overthink it too, right? So
you
step up in a wedding and you have a conversation, you're talking about a buddy and you're making fun of them and cracking jokes, and it comes off a little bit easier.
Sure.
Anytime you're trying to get up there and speak and like send a message home to a group of people, that's when the pressure like
absolutely
really hits you,
because they're expecting to take something home.
Yeah, but what you realize is like all the fears that you ultimately have about public speaking, every single person in that room has it 10x the amount that you do.
Sure.
And the fact that you just have the balls to get up there and do it kind of puts you in a different position, right? So a lot of it's like mental framing about how you go into the conversation. And then just, the nuance of like learning how to speak to the back of the room and not being overwhelmed by the fact that some people just have resting bitch face. And when you look at them, your brain starts running. You're like, oh man, they're not into it. That's not necessarily true, right? Mm-hmm. That's just them processing, or that's just how they look, right?
Right.
So you got to get over all those things. And once you can remove all of that psychological head trash,
mm-hmm.
that's really your own insecurity coming out.
Oh yeah.
And just get to just being authentically and having a conversation like we're doing right now, then you get better. And it comes down to what you said. It's just the reps, right? It's failing forward, right? Shameless plug. But it is. It's like doing it in incremental ways and making yourself uncomfortable. And 5 people becomes 10, 10 becomes 15, 15 becomes 500. I'd love one day to be like Tony Robbins level, where the dude speaks in front of 5,000 people,
mm-hmm.
right?
Is that the ultimate goal for you in terms of public speaking?
I don't know if it's I don't know if I have aspirations to say I want to be a professional speaker. I've thought a lot about it, and it can actually be incredibly lucrative, but I don't know if I necessarily, at least for my personality, I'm not the type of person where like all the limelight needs to be on me.
Sure.
I tend to operate really well inside of a team structure where maybe I'm at the helm, but I'm really just putting people in the right position to be successful and win.
Mm-hmm.
That feels more natural to me than, being the guy that has to get up there and rah everybody.
Okay.
Because I honestly, personally don't think I'm just all that like wise. Maybe I am. I don't know. I don't feel like Tony Robbins says stuff and I'm like, wow, that was really good the way he said that, and I just don't think my brain works that way, but maybe
that's its benefit, right? Your brain works differently.
Yeah, maybe.
There's things you would say that he wouldn't.
Yeah, that's true.
I guess it's all just about the perspective you take in terms of what you believe you're capable of, I suppose.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
The one thing I did love that you said a few moments ago is you're attracted to breathing life into others. That I like that a lot. That's definitely one of my most uh, attractive aspects of speaking is seeing that reaction, having the message land, and seeing the emotion it inspires
Yep.
from the words that you produced. That I love the just the way you phrased that because
Honestly, I think that that's why I was what I was put on earth to do. You know what I mean? I think there's that one thing, like your purpose, in life. And for me, it's just, it always comes back to one thing, like breathing life into other people. Like if I'm successful at the sake of somebody else, like that doesn't feel good to me. You know what I mean? But if I'm successful and bringing everybody along and they're living out their dreams and their purpose, like that gives me energy and more motivation to keep on and going and doing more stuff. You know what I mean? So, I think that the big takeaway is just, know what's important to you ultimately and why you're doing what you're doing. That's why when I think about speaking, it's not like it would never be about me, it would be about, what can I bring to everybody else. I personally don't know if my message is all that sexy that, people would want to pay, thousands of dollars to come hear it, but shit, maybe,
Hmm.
you know.
Because you mentioned it, talk to me a little bit about what you believe your purpose is, and more importantly, what did the road look like to that? Because I think that's something probably virtually everyone struggles with at some point in their life, whether they thought they had it and at some point it no longer seems like a fit for them, or others, specifically those who are younger, they might still be searching for that definition. Can you share a little bit on that for you?
So I'm obsessed with this word. It's in Japanese culture. It's called ikigai. You ever heard that before?
I haven't.
So ikigai in Japanese culture just simply means the reason that you get up in the morning, right? And so it's this intersection between your mission, your passion, your profession, and your vocation, where all those things align, that you ultimately find your meaning for being, and that can change throughout your life, right? Like, maybe you were a working female, and then you had kids, and it used to be about your career, and then you had kids, and now it's about your children, right? And that's okay. And I think it kind of ebbs and flows, right? Because in life, even when you quote unquote retire, like what does that really mean? You retire financially. Maybe you don't have to worry about money anymore, but we all need purpose. Like you want to watch an old person die quickly, watch them lose all purpose in their life. You know what I mean?
That's actually something super interesting that you brought up, because I just was looking at this study of comparing the average retiree, someone who lives in Arizona, Florida, golfs, does the community thing, versus nuns of roughly the same age who are still living together and following their service. And the nuns, not only in brain activity conducted by EEGs, but also in just how they verbally spoke about their well-being, was off the charts in comparison to the average retiree. And it boiled down to the suggestion being that still living in service of others, still doing things on a daily basis that you feel serves your purpose,
100%.
was the difference in brain activity, in overall personal happiness, as well as in basically identifiable anti-aging traits.
Yep.
They were even going as far as saying continuing to follow your purpose, regardless of its source, can be what actually keeps things like dementia at bay.
Yeah, 100%.
That blew my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's the art of achievement versus the art of fulfillment, right? Like you can go and do a ton of really dope stuff and still not be fulfilled. We talked about Tony Robbins a couple of minutes ago, but if you've ever heard him talk about Robin Williams, the guy for all intents and purposes had achieved like the pinnacle success of comedy and career and acting and life and family, and he killed himself. How's that happen, right? It's because you're focused on achieving and not on what's fulfilling you, so like when I think about ikigai and I think about like breathing life into other people, if the blue collar skater kid from California can grow up and do it, and that motivates somebody else to say that they can do it too, well, that gives me purpose, right? That gives me fulfillment, right? And when you start to understand that, then you can look at all the other areas of your life. Like, what do you want for your marriage? What do you want for your relationships with your friends? What do you want for your career, for your finances. And all of those things, when they're in line with your purpose, you've heard people say like, oh, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. That's actually what that means, right? It's like, if I have to, if I'm doing something and it's affecting my marriage, it's unfulfilling to me, right? I could be multimillionaire. I could be the most famous dude on the planet. But if I lose my wife in the process, I don't care, right? Because that's not why I was put here, right? All of those things matter to me, you know? So it's really hard to go somewhere when you don't actually have like perspective on what you want. And innately, we're all programmed to be good at certain things, right? So like, I grew up in a household where financial literacy was like the bottom of the totem pole. You know, my parents unfortunately still struggle with understanding how money works, right? But when my dad was 35, I was about 8 years old. He had a stroke. And what happened is my family quickly became health nuts, right? Thankfully, my dad was okay. He recovered well. But I remember at 8 years old, my dad was in stupid shape. Like he was 36, jacked, shredded, ate healthy. My parents worked out all the time. So how do you think I grew up? I grew up 40, 30, 30. I understood exercise. I understood health and fitness. That was second nature to me, right? And then you get out into the real world and you're really good at that area of your life and you're still struggling financially, right? So it's like, it's about, you know, finding those holes and trying to plug those gaps. But again, if you're just doing it for money without really knowing what the purpose is behind it, you're always going to struggle to be like fulfilled and ultimately happy. That's what we're all seeking, right? And money to me is just a means to an end for me to go do the stuff that I really care about, which is to serve others, right?
Absolutely. I love that. I really did. And I think that's probably what I would argue most people struggle with is they tie purpose to achievements. And I'm guilty of that. I mean, I remember as a kid, you'd get asked, I mean, we all got asked this where you're in class and the teacher's like, oh, draw a picture of what you want to be when you grow up. I never had an answer for that. Like other kids, they're drawing all these great pictures. I literally just sit there and stare at a blank page because I didn't know that picture. And now that I'm coming in on 30 years old, this is something I've reevaluated, I've reflected on. And literally what I was doing in my mind was taking metaphorical hangers with things I already knew and holding them up to the mirror and saying, does this look like it fits? Like, is this a good fit?
Yep.
And where I've taken that is that my purpose will never be tied to something that already exists. Not to say I can't go be a fireman, but I believe that purpose is not found, it's created. So what good does it do for me to try to answer a internal question with an external solution?
That's a good point. I think that, you know, we have all these different identities. So I think the trap is we identify what we do with who we are.
Right.
And those two things aren't necessarily congruent, right?
No.
You can be a person who breathes life into other people and be a school teacher.
Absolutely.
Or a CEO, right? Like those are vastly different career paths, but purpose is the thing that binds those two things.
Right. Yeah. And we as a society, not just even like Western society, but I know this is a very, very similar problem over in Asia as well, as we attach purpose to our work. You define whether or not you've done well based on the achievements and the success and growth you had at work.
Yep.
And what happens when that goes away? You know, people do lose the sense of self. They lose the sense of why am I here? The sense of worth, the sense of value that they brought to the world.
Well, I mean, I see that all the time with, I do a lot of mentorship on athletes that are transitioning out of college and into the next phase of their life, you know, and only 1% of college athletes go on to play professional athletics, right? So you've spent 15 years of your life, maybe longer, playing sports, and it's done. Your whole college experience has been curated for you. And then you come out the other end and nobody gives a shit, right? They scream your name in the stadium and now you're just the guy. And you go in and you try to get a job interview and they're like, yeah, but what have you done in business? Like, how does that translate over? You know what I mean? And so you lose this sense of identity. There's a good book called Atomic Habit. You ever read it?
I haven't.
Okay. So in that book, they talk specifically about any major change that you want to make in your life ultimately comes down to not necessarily habit formation, but identity transformation.
Absolutely.
Right. So like the example that is vivid and something we can relate on is health and fitness and nutrition. Right. So you want to be, maybe you're 100 pounds overweight and you just can't stick to a diet, right? And it's because you're focused on the diet as the thing that's ultimately going to make you be fulfilled, right? But what he says in the book is, he says the type of person who's in shape, who loses 100 pounds, keeps it off, and lives a healthy lifestyle is the type of person that goes to the gym every day.
Right.
I am the type of person that goes to the gym every day, right? And it's like, that's the shift, right? So I call it the power of I am, is how I think about it. So, anytime you're trying to break into something new, one of the things that like holds people back from going and doing that is they can't identify as that person yet.
Right.
Oh, I couldn't do that. I don't come from money. I could never be that. I could never go and accomplish that, or whatever it may be, and ultimately they have to first believe it from an identity standpoint of like, that's who they are and where they want to go, So when all that stuff comes back to the root of like who you are and why does that even matter and what's your purpose here, and you're doing it for the right reasons, it's about fulfillment, you almost can't lose, right? Like I talk about it being, I sat down with my pastor the other day and we talked specifically about, like how he's incredible at being a communicator and breathing life into other people. I'm like, man, how do you do that? And he's like, I don't know. I just do it. Right. And I had this epiphany that it's like, it's because it's what you were meant to do. Like you're living out your purpose. And when you do that, it's attractive. It's the most attractive thing on the planet, and people want to be around you, and you can't help but win. You know what I mean? Ultimately. So I digress, but
no, that was perfect. See, that's why I don't do structure, because I know the conversation will go just where it's meant to go. You said something though that brought up a question. Are you a guy who does mantras? You have something you repeat to yourself, or anything in that regard? Positive self-talk? Are you that kind of guy?
I'm naturally a positive self-talker.
Okay.
I do it with my kids though a lot. Where
Give me an example.
Well, we just every night so your subconscious is the driver of most of our belief patterns, right? So I'm ingraining that at a very young age. The epiphany came to me actually, and I think we'll get into this a little bit later, but I was going through some counseling like 5-6 years ago after I had a panic attack, and I had these like negative thoughts that were like popping into my head, and the counselor asked me a question. He said, "Whose voice is it?" And I said, "It's my voice." And then he said, No, whose voice is that? And it was my grandfather's voice. And it was the first time that I realized that there could be a voice and something being said in my head that wasn't my own voice. It was somebody else's voice. So what I do with my girls every night when we have prayers is we say our prayers, and then we go through, I am brave, I am strong, I am powerful, I'm courageous, I'm kind, I'm beautiful, smart, I'm intelligent, people love me, my family loves me, God loves me, my parents love me, right? And we go through this process every single day to the point where like now when they go to school, I go, all right, I'm brave. And then they just boom, 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 boom. They just rattle it off.
Dude,
right?
I love that.
Because it can't just be my words, right? It's also got to be their words, and they got to believe it. So
did they help decide that list of what that was?
No.
Was that something you instilled?
I kind of instilled it, but occasionally like my daughter will be like, and I'm sporty or I'm whatever,
They personalize it a little bit.
Yeah. So, I do believe a lot in the power of self-talk, and we can just go there. 6 years ago when I had a panic attack, literally woke up in the middle of the night. My heart was racing. I'm sweating. I thought I was having a heart attack. I thought I was going to die. And then it set off just a ton of anxiety attacks for me, because you're just afraid you're like going to get another one.
Right.
You know what I mean?
You have the fear of it returning.
Yeah. And for the first time in my life, I had struggled with the thought of suicide. Not that I was going to do it, but it was like that it was maybe even an option.
Sure.
And I'd always looked at people who experienced that as like, I don't even understand how you could like go through that or have that type of thought run through your mind. And then I was there. Right. And that'll eat out your psyche pretty quick. Right. So I would struggle with this negative talk track and thought pattern. And ultimately I had to force myself every single day to continue to have this positive self-talk. And I didn't even believe it.
Sure.
But I just kept saying it. And then eventually one day I started believing it again. Right. And I felt more like myself, and I felt more normal. And, it's like with anything that you want to do, it sucks at first. You know what I mean? It's just committing to it, and the power of I am and the belief set that comes along with and ingraining that in your identity. You know what I mean? And nobody can do that for you. Ultimately, like you have to be able to do that yourself.
I'm really, really, really thankful you shared that one, because I know that's not an easy thing to discuss. Someone who does face depression and anxiety. It took me years to actually openly mention that to somebody out loud for the first time. And that's a big reason why I'm here doing this, whether it's this or what this leads me to. That's part of what I've created to be my purpose is that I experience this for the purpose of being able to help others, even if it's just one person.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know that talking about it allows people to understand that they're not alone. They're not the only people facing this. And more importantly, there's a good way to go about dealing with it in terms of the habits you instill when those days happen, but also how those around you can react as well.
Yep.
And you brought up an interesting point, and honestly, I didn't have this plan to discuss, but just because the conversation went there, I actually had my first depressive episode last night in probably like 3 months. And this was something that I faced daily for a long time through my early 20s. And now I have much more firm control over it, something that I don't get very often. But the reason I feel like bringing this up is because the way my wife responded was probably the best way I could personally receive her response. In terms of, I think people naturally want to, if someone does approach them in a vulnerable state and actually wants to talk about this, I think their immediate response, and it's not bad that they do this, they're trying their best, to be honest, but they have a tendency to say things like, you shouldn't feel this way. You have so many things to be grateful for.
Right?
How could you be so selfish to think about suicide? That's not the most productive way to address someone who just opened up to you.
You don't validate.
Right. Well, you're also telling them that the way they think is wrong.
Or the way they feel is wrong.
Right. And if you experience depression, you already have told yourself you don't like the way you feel or think.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need another person reiterating that.
Yeah, 100%.
But my wife, bless her heart, she's been going through this with me for the last 3.5 years or so, and she knows me very well. She can look at my face and go, "Hey, are you okay?" Like, I can tell something's off. And that happened last night. And she, instead of going to those standard questions or statements, even, she walked out of the room, went and grabbed her dinner from the kitchen table, came onto the couch, sat right up next to me, established that physical touch, and just let me be quiet for 10 minutes or so. Because she also knows that I like to kind of explore those spaces when my mental state is there. Because again, I believe my purpose is tied to those experiences. So to me, even though it's a difficult experience, I also look at it as an opportunity to learn. I tell myself this is something that no one else is experiencing, at least right now. And I now have an opportunity to grow from it. So she gave me my 10 or 15 minutes of just quiet. And then instead of addressing it directly, she started asking me about things from my day that she knew I was excited about, but hadn't talked about. So she was like, "Well, how was the podcast recording today? Like, how was Zach?"
Yep.
And my conversation is, "Oh, it was great. Like, let me tell you about his story. Like, this was amazing. Like, I can't believe what he's done for people." And then she goes, she lets me tell that story. And then she goes, "Well, you had your Go Mix weekly, your weekly team call today. Like, how did that go?" And I'm really excited. I'm like, "Oh, babe, I had this idea for a marketing campaign. Like, I'm so excited. Like, this is what I want to do." And I didn't even realize it in the moment. I didn't recognize it until this morning on my walk. I was like, she just played the hell out of me. She got me completely off my almost self-destructive internal thought process, and knew that if she got me talking about things I am excited about, instead of saying, "You should be excited about these things," she just got me talking about it. And it was amazing. Like it completely transitioned what could have been a very horrible evening for me mentally. And the reason I want to share that is because there's power in speaking about this, whether it's in a setting like this or with your spouse or with your best friend or with your parents, because the more they understand it, the more equipped they're going to be to help you as well. And that's I think, been the biggest hurdle we as a society face with things like mental health, or even just failure in general, business failure, relationship failure. We have this common tendency to just brush these things under the rug. We don't talk about it. And when we don't talk about it, we don't allow others to learn from it as well.
It's because we think that it's a weakness to talk about it. And so the more that when I was having my panic attack, the more that I shared it, the more people that are like, oh, I've had the same thing happen to me. So it normalized it, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you're going down that path, was when I was telling you about public speaking earlier, when you're looking at people and you're seeing the look on their face, right? And all the fears start running through your head. Like everybody has those same thoughts and fears. You're not somehow like exclusive. Like if you're a good public speaker, you somehow don't have those negative talk tracks. Everybody has them, right? You just get better at dealing with them. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that you're also doing too is being able to talk about it or just have the introspective thought about it is perspective. It's always 100% perspective. And then there's those deeper, and the thing I'll challenge you with is when you have those thoughts, whose voice is it?
So I want to come back to that for a sec.
Yeah.
How did you, because when you said it was your grandfather's voice, I legitimately got chills, like that hit me physically. How did you identify that it was your grandfather's voice? Because you almost sounded like you didn't recognize it initially.
No, you don't recognize it initially because you have to go there and have to listen to it. You know what I mean? So it was thoughts in and around like not being good enough, not being perfect enough. My grandfather was an Italian Catholic Marine.
Did you have a strong relationship with him growing up?
Relatively strong. He was kind of a hard dude to get close to, you know. He was loving and affectionate and loved to cook in that way, but in terms of being like an emotional open book, he wasn't. He was an Italian Catholic Marine, right?
Yeah.
You don't share emotions in that way. But he was always like a stickler on everything, you know? So I was close to him in the sense that I was always helping them and going to their house and things like that. But perfection, which is it's not real, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you have those failures or those things where you feel like you're messing up or falling short, and you start to go down that track of not being good enough or whatever it is, you have to like take a minute and stop and go, that's a negative thought. It's not my voice, not reality. You have to train yourself to be able to see the other side of the spectrum, which is what normally people would do. Like, oh, Jared, you have all these things to be excited about. We have to train ourselves in order to do that.
You know? Right. Wow. It's not super often that I talk with someone about a mental health occurrence and they say something that is just absolutely brand new to me. Because again, usually I'm the person that's sharing and the one that says something that's brand new to them, but I've never actually paid attention to who the voice is.
Yep. It's definitely mind blowing. So, it's like your parents always tell you when you're a kid, like, oh, the stuff you're listening to, it fills your head. You don't realize it, you know? But I started as I got older, I would realize that like if I listened to a bunch of music and the music would play in my dream. Because I'd wake up in the morning and I'm singing the songs that I was listening to yesterday. I'm like, that's weird, right?
Right.
So I kind of become not obsessed, but just more observant of the subconscious mind, right? Of like, who's controlling the dialogue right now? Is it me in the active thought process? Or is it the subconscious mind that's spitting up some stuff because of something I saw or something that happened today or my sleep pattern or whatever it is? You know what I mean? So on the just like training on the other side of that, like you got to be constantly filling your mind with the positive stuff in an attempt to try to overcome that. But then when those moments pop up, like just take a minute to just address it. Like, is this really me? Right? I remember I'll give you another example. I remember I used to be, I consider myself to be pretty fit now, but I've always been body self-conscious. Right? And I can distinctly remember going to Raging Waters, which was like a water park, as a kid and floating in the water. I was maybe like 8 years old. And I got next to these two little girls and they're like, ew, get away, you're fat, right? And like brutal, right? But the reality of it is like most people look at me and they're like, oh, that dude's in good shape, right? But then me internally, I didn't feel like, I thought I was fat, right? Body dysmorphia like crazy, right? So addressing again, like what that thought that's going through your head, is that your voice or is that somebody else? Is that moment traumatized me, like the first time you're 8, 9 years old, you start to become conscious of your body, right? And somebody says some shit like that, that'll ruin you,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've always been, I don't want to say always, but ever since I began shifting my perspective on depression, I've always been a big advocate for questioning the internal conversation.
Yep.
If you have something reoccurring, whether it's suicidal fantasies or, thoughts of unworthiness, whatever it may be, the immediate reaction, especially if this is something new to you, is to push it away, because it's a scary thought. It doesn't feel good to think it's kind of loud and abrupt, and the initial thought is to avoid it.
Yep.
And one of the biggest things for me was not only facing the thought, but questioning it, evaluating it, asking it why.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never taken it to the extent of the voice itself. And that literally has my brain is running like a million miles a minute.
Well, because if I walked up to you right now and I was like, Jared, you're a total piece of shit, you'd be like, dude, screw you, right? Because it's easier, right? You can put a face to the person that's like addressing you or attacking you. But if it's in your subconscious, we internalize a lot of that stuff. So one of the things I talk a lot about is and one of the things I think that helped me get through my panic attack and that stint with depression was just, callousing the mind, right? Like I intentionally take myself to a place of like suffering, right? Training, football, whatever it may be, because that gives me strength to get through those hard times, because this is life. Life is going to happen sometimes, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so how are you going to deal with that? You know what I mean? It's a very stoic approach to hardship. But
it's a biological approach.
Yeah, it's true, right?
Homeostasis is stress-free. It's balanced. It's equilibrium. Allostasis is the state of maintaining homeostasis while experiencing external stressors.
Yep.
It's standing up straight while taking a hit. It's putting the weight back up in a squat. It's literally the fight against stress.
Yeah, and if you don't go there and anything hard happens, you start to think that everything is suffering because you don't have a relative gauge.
Right.
It's like you don't know what hard is until you've done 10 sets of 10 at like 405, right? Like that sucks. Like you want to puke, you want to vomit, right? You don't know what hard is until like when I was in college, I had a scholarship. I walked away from my scholarship, went to the University of Colorado because that's where I wanted to play, lived in a shitty apartment, had no phone, no car, right? No way to get anywhere, no money, ate fucking top ramen every night. You know what I mean? And I woke up every morning at 4:00 and trained in the field in the dark because I didn't want anybody to see me training, right? But that experience has like been a precipice for everything in my life. It's like, dude, you know how hard that moment was? That sucked.
Well, what came from all that hardness, all that difficulty?
But yeah, I met my wife, got my job, ended up in Colorado, and like all of those, you know what I mean? So you have to regularly and often take yourself to that place. If you don't do that, then again, something bad happens, or I guess relatively bad happens, and you feel like, oh, this is the worst thing that ever happened.
Right. Yeah. It is all relative. That's a little bit of a fear of mine, is that we avoid stress and difficulty like it's the plague now. Like we have so many tools to just make tasks easier. Like things take less steps.
Or just to numb it.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Netflix, alcohol, weed,
prescription drugs,
drugs. Yeah. You name
it. There's so many ways to avoid it, to numb it, that I genuinely worry what that will do to humans as a whole, because there's so many outlets and vices and tools to take it away or have us move around it.
100%.
It's very rare that we end up in it unintentionally, but it's the people who run into it with full intention that, I don't want to say set themselves apart, but those are the people that really understand its value.
Yep. 100%.
Yeah.
If you haven't read anything by David Goggins, go read his stuff.
Who's David Goggins? No, he's a great guy. Excellent on every podcast. He's a great like morning motivator, dude, for sure.
He's a
You
little
have
nuts.
those days that you're slacking a little bit. Just have him call you a pussy and like, damn it, David.
I like his week one, day one mindset.
Yeah.
Where it's just like that every day he goes into it like this is the first day, this is the first week. Because in anything you do, you're like super jacked about it. Like,
Yeah.
imagine when you're 100 podcasts deep, a little bit of the luster is going to wear off a little bit,
Sure.
but you got to remember like what we've been talking about, like why are you doing this?
Mhm.
Why does it even matter,
Mhm.
anyways?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we went off on a little tangent there, but I'm not sorry. I thought
That was not
amazing.
little, that was large.
That was fantastic. We're still like up here on my notes. But to go back to the motivational speaking for just a moment, tell me a little bit about scale and how that came to be. Like what, not because I know you don't want to share a ton probably because that's part of, why you go in to speak. But I guess I'm more curious, what happened to make you start building that? Like, where did that come from? Was that through your time at Madwire? Was that?
So I've never been, I think about it like in sports, I've never been like the best athlete.
Okay.
So I've always had to just be better at the game in general, even, bodybuilding or strength or whatever, very religious in just like how I program or how I think about stuff. I also have a degree in physiology. So like I'm trained in like science. So I think about everything like as an equation.
Okay.
Right? And so, for example, like people are like, how do you get confidence in something? Well, I'm like, okay, well, you need to have knowledge and you have to have experience. So knowledge plus experience equals confidence. Okay, well, if you don't have experience, like if I can replace experience with something else, it would be a playbook, right? So like, how do I give you a playbook that's going to allow you to execute moderately well so that you can learn the play, which is essentially translating experience over so that you can go and do it. And then eventually you become more confident, right?
Mhm.
I mean, think about in the NFL, you have some of the best athletes on the planet, right? They run a playbook. Why would they run a playbook? Why don't they just go out there and just run around? Because
Puts
if you have a
everyone on the same
playbook, now you know what the play is, you can just go be an athlete,
Mhm.
right? So it allows you to operate at the highest level, right? And so that's how I think about everything. So the acronym SCALE is really just like systems, right? And then it's designed around business, right? So you got to systematize things. It's creating a culture of personal accountability.
Mhm.
It's taking action, right? It's learning from the data, and then it's executing, right? So it's the process of failing forward, right? It's, hey, I have a system, right? I am going to go out there and say, I'm going to own this and I'm going to do it. I'm going to take action and I'm going to learn. And then I'm going to learn, optimize, and then I'm going to go back and execute it again. And I'm going to learn, optimize, I'm going to go back and execute it again. And that's just how my brain works. So, when it comes to like thinking about risk or starting a business or whatever it may be, it's being calculated with it. And that's why you write a business plan, right? But the business plan changes like 152 times. The goal doesn't, right?
Sure.
But you have to have a general semblance of like where we're going and how we're going to get there, right? If I said, hey, Jared, you want to go on a trip? Jump in the car. What's the first question you're going to ask me?
Where are we going?
Where we're going, right? So, it's like you got to have an idea of that. If I said, hey, Jared, would you plan a trip for me? You'd say, yeah. How do you want to get there? Like, how quickly? What path are we going on? Is it going to be plane, train, or automobile? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
All those things kind of determine like the end goal of where you're trying to go, right? So essentially, it's just taking things that are seemingly ethereal and complex and trying to give them context. And that's what makes, like, when you're trying to scale people or teams or processes, it's what makes it incredibly challenging is how do I get you up to speed as a new employee on 3 years of knowledge that I've never documented? The answer is I don't. So you'll hear people say, oh, they just weren't a good fit. No, you were just a really shitty coach because you gave them no tools in order to be successful. You don't hire people based off of experience, unless, of course, like you want to hire people that are just like you. Well, you better be ready to pay them a premium, right? So you're either going to pay up for it or you're going to train the people to get to that level, right? I hire people on whether they're humble, hungry, smart, gritty, or competitive, and they have personal accountability, right? I can't teach you those things, right? But I can take systems and processes and allow you to go put them into action, which then allow you to learn and execute at a higher level. You can use technology to do that stuff, right? And so that's essentially what the thought process is that's why most people who start a business are not entrepreneurs. Most people who start a business are a technician. They're really good at their respective skill or craft. And then all of a sudden they have to grow and scale the business and transcend that knowledge to somebody else, and they can't do it.
Right.
Right. An entrepreneur is a technician of business, right? So that's like an entrepreneurial mindset, is systematizing and processing and organizing people and humans to go and do the stuff that you used to do so you can go focus on other things that are going to move the business forward, you know?
Absolutely. I really liked that. I have two questions. First, is there any piece of that you take into evaluating potential relationships?
With
Whether
people?
Whether it's
No.
business partnerships, nothing.
No.
I was just curious if some of that came from.
I'm
I know it's not that technical, but I also know you're very careful about
I tend
who
to
you're
see
careful with, I would assume.
No, I mean, I tend to see the best in everybody, right? So I am, I see potential in everybody and I let them prove me wrong, right? So
Okay.
I don't think about it like when I go into, I might be calculated in the sense of like how we structure the relationship, and that just comes from experience. But I see potential in people and I see how we can win together. Whether or not they go execute on that is to be determined. If you're an employee, different process.
Sure.
If you're a partner, I'm expecting you to live up to that and to go execute.
Absolutely.
If you can't, then I'm going to have a conversation with you about it. And if not, then, we're not going to be partners anymore. It's, it's pretty straightforward. If I'm going to give you equity in the business, like, you better pull your weight. Otherwise you're just a glorified employee at that point. Right. So, so I don't really think about it that way, because I just like people in general and I like to do dope stuff together. And,
Sure.
Whether it's, building a gym, or it's starting a real estate group, or it's, growing and scaling a team, it doesn't matter. I try to find what that potential is for that person and get the right person in the right seat to go execute on it. And that might be a partner, or it might be an employee, but yeah, I don't like go into it with like preconceived notion of
interview style. Is that why we're not friends? Did I not pass? No, I was just curious, because I think it's, if you pay close enough attention, people repeat themselves, not in what they say, but in what they do.
Yeah, it's true.
And just because you've implemented such a successful strategy in a couple different forms of business, I was curious if any of that part of that is a carryover from your personal life.
I would say now I'm a little bit more sophisticated in it. Like now I definitely abide by the EOS system, which we talked a little bit about before. You grade people on gets it, wants it, and capable. I try to lean into my strengths a lot and backfill the stuff that I'm not necessarily, not that I'm not good at, but it doesn't give me energy. It's not my default state where I feel like I'm in my lane, like have you ever done a strength finders test before?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm like a communicator, I'm a visionary, I'm an executor. Those are my top three. But if you put me in like a spreadsheet for like 2 hours, like I want to go jump off the third story of the building, right? It's like, I can do it. I can understand it. I can read it, but I don't geek out on that stuff because I'm not much of an analyzer in that sense. I'm really good at delegating people who can do that and let them go do it. So, in EOS, they call it gets it, wants it, capable, right? So get the right people in the right seat. And so I've definitely gotten better at that. And, when you start out in entrepreneurship, it's a little more crude. You don't really have context yet, Again, there's no experience there, right?
Yeah.
So
you're filling a position that you haven't completely filled out, essentially.
Totally.
You have an idea of it, but you don't know every aspect of it.
So you got to define it. So that helps you.
Absolutely. Speaking of relationships, how important is something like your spouse in terms of what you do in terms of your career?
It's the forefront of every decision. Like some of the things that I've wanted, guys are innately bigger risk takers. We'll just kind of jump and go do something, but she's always, my relationship with my wife is 10x important, like anything else that I do in my life. We talked about that a little bit earlier, right? It's, we all know that person, incredibly successful entrepreneur and like horrible relationship with his kids or with his wife or whatever it may be. I was never willing to sacrifice that because I just understood early on that my family and my relationship with my wife, that's why I'm doing it, right? It's like, it's about leaving a legacy at the end of the day. And a legacy that is shared with no one is nothing. It's not a legacy, right? It's just, you're just being selfish at that point, you know?
Sure.
So it's a lot of just like imbalance of, you know, when you're on husband mode and you're with your wife, you know, you make that a priority. We date a lot, you know, we've been together for 16 years, married for 11, going on year 12.
Treat it like it's still a courtship.
Yeah. I mean, we're still learning and growing and getting to know each other. And so, you know, people are like, man, how do you afford that? Right. It's like, you know, you can go out to eat and it's $150 and you got to pay the babysitter and it's $40-50 and gas. And I'm like, do you know what's expensive? Divorce. Divorce is really expensive. Me spending $250 to go out with my wife for a date, you know, once or twice a month is super cheap. Why am I doing it? To hoard it all? To bury myself with it?
What's funny is, you know, when you start dating someone, you will make financial sacrifices to have that $250
100%.
to make sure that your girlfriend has the time of her life.
Absolutely.
Why would we stop doing that now that she's your wife?
We get comfortable.
We do 100%. But
we don't have a concept of like time. We have a concept of like change. So it's important to be like spending the money and experiencing and doing that stuff together.
Absolutely. And you kind of already answered this, but I'm just curious if you go a little bit deeper with it. Do you believe you found Casey is your wife?
Yep.
Do you believe you found Casey because of who you are, or did she help define who you are? And I ask that because this is a question
It's
I'm
both.
asking.
It's both.
Okay. Tell me
Because
why.
she's made, so the person she married is not the person who she's with today.
Right.
And vice versa. When I met her, I was at my, so JB was my teammate in New Mexico. When I moved to Colorado, I had a girlfriend. We broke up because we were on just different pages. She was a sorority girl. I was like, mom and dad are paying for my
girl.
him, not a sorority, even though I could pass. But she wanted to party, and I'm like, mom and dad aren't paying for school. I got to get a scholarship, or I'm going back to junior college. So like 9 months later, my buddy who I played with in New Mexico lived in Loveland, Colorado, and he got married to the woman that he met. And at his wedding, I met his sister for the first time.
Really?
Right? And it was like, the joke is, I knew he had sisters. I just didn't know he had like sisters, like those kind of sisters, you know? And instantly, dude, it was like fireworks. Like so I had this huge crush on Julia Roberts growing up, and she's got this like subtle Julia Roberts look to her, but she was like edgy and mysterious. And I pursued her like crazy, like so hard. And she had always been, she's not super into like athletics or football players, because most of them in her eyes were douchebags. So her brother's friends had tried this before, you know? So she was fighting me, which, you know, it only made the chase more exciting. Right.
The best ones tell you no first.
Totally. 100%. And so I just pursued her, and then we just hit on a different level. You know, we connected a lot on music. We connected a lot on art. We're both Aquarius, so we have this real creative side to us, you know? And that was different for her. She never really expected that, but she had never really had somebody like pursue her like that.
Sure.
Like, it was like, I have to know you, you know, deeply. And so, yeah, that was it. Like, we hit it off at the wedding, and I made my moves quick. That night we had a bachelorette party and got, you know, had a good time. Let's put it like that. And it's like 3:00 in the morning. And I asked JB, I said, hey man, I don't know how to say this, but I'm really into your sister and I would love to take her out on a date. And I quote, I'd rather have you than some effing asshole who I don't know. So yeah, that's a yes.
Very
and I'm
respectful
like, I was like, sweet. So we took her on a date. Like 7 days later, we went to like the Chalk Walk down in Denver. She was an artist, right? So I'm like trying to win these brownie points.
Absolutely.
Right?
Good thinking.
And then we just had we had 12 hours together from the morning to the evening. We just spent every minute together. And I was hooked. You know, granted, I had gotten out of a relationship and she had just gotten out of a relationship. She went back to school at Colorado Mountain College in Glenwood Springs. So we were kind of like not official for like a year. And just every woman that I tried to go on a date with was just always, she was the standard, you know? So she moved back and that was it. But to answer your question more specifically, it's a process, man. She's been by my side at my best and at my worst. She has, been fearful of me going and starting a business because she didn't really understand how it was going to happen financially. And I've, continued to prove my ability to execute. And she's built up her faith and trust. And now she knows, like, we'll be fine no matter what happens, but
Right.
at the end of the day, what I know above everything, you can take my cars, you can take my houses, all that stuff. We could lose everything tomorrow and she would still be there. And that's everything to me. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And you want to talk about a superpower, right? When you're not afraid to lose, you're pretty much unstoppable,
I like that. I haven't heard that before.
If because what are you fearful of? Like, if you're going into it and you're afraid you're going to lose, you're clinging on to something, right? So the mind gets what the mind focuses on. So if you're focused on not losing, you're going to lose.
Right.
If you're focused on winning because the cars and the house and the anything don't define you, right? The achievements don't define you. Then how do you lose? Because you literally can't beat me. Like, I'm literally saying, take everything. I'll be okay. Right.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's something I commonly think about with Annie. Is she's the biggest motivator for me in taking risks, in pursuing new opportunities. But I also don't need any of that in order to feel fulfilled. If I have her support and her love and my ability to continue at least trying something, then that's always been okay.
And I think you need to keep digging on that too. I mean, one of the things that Casey and I did in the last 3 years or so, you ever done a DISC test?
No. Tell me about it.
So a DISC test is just like a personality test, right? And so it's dominant, influential. I can't remember what S and the C are. C is like conscientious. So we took those tests to like learn about each other's.
How did you learn about it?
Shit, just being in business.
Yeah. Okay.
But we took those tests to just kind of compare and contrast them, right? So
Yeah.
I'm a moderate D, which means I'm not a super dominant personality, but I'm a high I, which means I love people, right? But in that test, it also tells you, what's your biggest fear? So my number one fear as a high I is not being liked by other people, right? So if we have to have a hard conversation, maybe I had to fire you or something, I have to do it in a way that, like, hey, when it's all said and done, we can go grab beers after, right? Where like my father-in-law, he's like, he can come in and like MF you and then like, hey, you want to go to dinner after? And I'm like, no, screw you. I don't, you know what I mean? So that's like my personality. But she's a high C, which means she's like a cross your T's, dot your I's. And her biggest fear is being wrong, right? So you want to talk about like every little spat that we've ever had in our relationship. You have the high I who loves people, whose biggest fear is not being liked or loved, right? And you have the high C who's super conscientious, thoughtful, thinks through everything, every angle, every person involved before she does something, literally like instantaneously. And she says something and it hurts my feelings. And I go to her like, babe, that really hurt my feelings. Her response is, you're being ridiculous, right? Because she doesn't want to be wrong, right? So you talk about like every little conflict that we have. So as soon as we started to realize that about each other, it's hey, you're not validating my feelings. And I have to like stop for a second and realize that you never meant it that way in the first place. Because you would never intentionally do anything. This is my own shit that I'm dealing with right now that's making me feel this way. You know what I mean? So just from a relationship standpoint, like we're still learning stuff about each other, right? We've been together for 16 years. That's a big part of the process. You have to constantly be investing in that, and, God bless my parents, but like, they've been married for almost 40 years. And then sometimes I feel like, man, you guys don't know each other at all, right? Because it's like a culture thing. Like you just brush it under the rug, right? Or he should act a certain way or she should act a certain way to accommodate me.
It's more expectations than understanding.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like what you should do for me. It's like, you want to get change out of people, then you should focus on what you can do for them.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so, yeah, my wife is my biggest supporter, man. She's my ride or die. Literally. And she wants nothing. I want to give her everything. She wants nothing. I tried to buy her like $100 pair of leggings one time. She made me take her back. And then she made me take her to Marshall's, and she came out with 5
I was
pairs
going to
of
say,
like
she
Nikes.
showed you how much
And then
bought
she rubbed it at my
$100.
face. And I was like, no, yeah.
Oh
all right.
my God, if that is not my wife to a T. She is that type of girl. I'd live like, babe, look at this nice thing. She'd be like, I could get so much for the amount that you spent on that. I'm like, but that's not the point. It's
Because
not.
she's not motivated like that. Her love,
yeah.
my wife's love languages are like time.
Yeah.
She just wants to spend time together.
I love that you guys went to that extent to explore and learn from each other. I will. That's something I will absolutely take away from this today. Is Annie and I are doing that 100%, because we faced challenges right off the bat, not in terms of getting along or anything in that sense, but in terms of just personality compatibility, I guess I'll say. I'm someone who I won't let just a conversation go to silence. If we're having a disagreement, I'm going to continue communicating until we reach our agreement. And on top of that, she was someone who, and I say was because she's changed a lot, is she was someone who did not like to talk about how she felt. What we've discovered over time is it's not that she doesn't know how she felt, it's not that she didn't like to talk about it. It's that she just needed a few minutes to really understand how she felt.
Process, yeah.
So I needed to learn to be more patient and give her time to think and process the information. But she also learned that I'm too impatient to just let things settle, or not settle, but just let things go. Like I need to see it through to the resolution, basically.
Yep.
So through that, there was the trial and error, because I want to sit and, why aren't you talking to me? And she's like, I need a minute. Like, so, you go through that, and it's not, pretty in the beginning, because you're learning each other. You're learning what not to say or how to say something, but how they want to be understood. And that's something that's tough, because I think we're all raised, or we have this intuitive notion and I'll say the common known phrase, to treat people the way you want to be treated. Like that's a great moral standard. But if I don't know you on that personal level, I don't know how to communicate with you directly, especially if it is a more serious conversation. I need to know how to express it to you, and not just assume that the way I want to hear it is the way you want to hear it.
Yep. Well, we tend to like love in the way that we want to be loved, right? And that's just, we've had to learn.
You guys have read the 5 life languages, I'm assuming.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And our first year of marriage was tough, man.
Yeah.
There's a misconception that you get married and it's like, oh, look at, we got married. It's going to be easy. And we celebrate anniversaries like, oh, look, it's just another year of just wonderfulness, but like, think about like a big business victory you've had, right? Mm-hmm. Did you celebrate like, yeah, we did that? Or it's like, dude, we worked so damn hard to get to this point and we got there. Right?
Absolutely. The second.
That's what an anniversary is. It's like we're recommitting to each other for another year to say, hey, I'm ready to go through this for another year. I'm ready to go through this for another 10 years. I really liked that. You know what I mean? So it's just a reframing of like how you think about it. You never arrive. Like just because you got the 6-pack abs doesn't mean you can just go eat a tub of ice cream and drink beers every night and keep a 6-pack set of abs. That's not how that works. Mm-hmm. It gets a little easier. You get better at it, right? But you're still gonna have your ups and your downs. You're still gonna sometimes want to go get Dairy Queen at 12. Oh yeah, right? For sure. That's why it's there. No, you're absolutely right. It's never like I don't even really believe in like the honeymoon phase. Like I didn't even before marriage. Like just because something is new doesn't mean it's easy. Like I understand that the longer you engage with someone or the longer you do anything, you're going to experience more hardships over a longer period of time. And that's just commonly understood. But I mean, our first year of marriage, we spent in quarantine. We were 7 months into our first year of marriage when we went into lockdown. Yeah. And we had to learn from each other even more. And it wasn't, and we did great with it, but it was, like she's starting to learn like who Jared is on the work phone. And I'm understanding that she likes it quiet when she's focused on things. Casey does that to me. I was like, you're so loud on the phone. I'm like, I'm just talking. Right. Like, get off me. Yeah. She's like, say circle back one more time, babe. I'm like, yeah, okay. Say synergy one more time. I get it. I need to expand my vocabulary. Oh my gosh, man. Dude, this was amazing. This really was. I could have walked in here without any notes at all, and we would have had the exact same conversation. We kind of talked about it before we started.
I like to have some frame of reference when I sit down with someone in these settings, because I'm someone who likes to visualize. I'm someone who likes to plan ahead and feel very confident in the outcome of something before it happens. And I do that by making notes and doing research and preparing. And this is something I'm going to continue to do. But I knew going into this that I even said it to Alex before. I said, if I didn't have any notes on this, I knew we'd have an amazing hour of conversation.
Planning is important, but it's also useless.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's more for my anxiety. If I plan, I can walk in and be calmer.
Well, I mean, this is what we talked about. I do the same thing, when you're like prepping for a speech or something like that, or a meeting or whatever it may be. You want to be as prepared as possible, but you also got to be flexible. And,
absolutely.
And how that works out. And I think that's just, the nature of being adaptable. I think a lot of people struggle with that. They can't, I don't want to call it roll with the punches, but they get punched and then they just cower, they don't know how to
Well, I think respond. A big part of it is people want to know the next step while still performing the prior one.
Right.
They want to see the next stone. And when you don't have the ability to see that, there is an opportunity for anxiety. But there's growth in that. There's opportunity in that as well.
The better you are at handling uncertainty and dealing with it, the more successful you ultimately
absolutely
be. People don't do a lot of things in their life because they don't know what to expect.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Like, welcome to being a human. It's like, people just don't ever leave their hometown or whatever it may be. I think one of the best things that you can do is get outside your box for a little while. Well, is there any one last ringer that you want to ask me?
I actually have one.
Okay.
I have one. So there's something I read I don't know, probably like 6 months ago. And when we had our first conversation, you're like, yeah, I'd love to come on. I immediately opened up a Google Doc and I wrote this down because it's something I think about a lot. But there's some studies that suggest that we as humans stop evolving as an individual around, I think it was like our late 30s, 38, 39, I think is what it said. And the reason for that is because we stop having new experiences, at least at a very consistent rate. As children, as young adults, we have new experiences all the time. We're constantly going to new schools. Our parents are moving us, taking us to new locations. We meet new friends. We get our license and we learn to drive a car. We turn 21. We start going to bars and ordering drinks, and we go to college, and every day is a new experience. And experiences and how we respond to them is what creates our beliefs. It's what creates who we are as a person and our identity. But when we hit that, late 30s, maybe even early 40s time frame, a lot of us have fallen into routine. We've been at the same company for 10 years. We drive the same commute to work. We pass the same businesses on our way. We sit in the same desk. We interact with the same people. We go home and sit on the same couch, and we watch the same TV shows. So we almost just cement, or there's a hardening of the brain at this point, because we're no longer experiencing the stress associated with a new experience. Doesn't mean that stress goes away, obviously, but that new experience does. And this is something I think about on a constant basis, mainly because I'm 30 and I'm approaching that number.
Yeah, you're old as shit.
I know, man. Can't you tell? But no, because I don't ever want to hit that point. I'm someone who has dug myself out of the darkest mental depths by learning new things. Mm-hmm. When I decided that my depression was not going to dictate the outcome of my life, I bought a textbook on brain chemistry and I started reading it because I wanted to know what's happening internally when I start feeling this way. I want to understand the molecules that are produced when we feel good, when we feel bad, what the brain perceives as memory and real experience. And that's led me to all sorts of different topics. And I found out that I love learning this shit too.
Yeah.
And I love to talk about it with other people as well. But I guess the point I'm getting at is I know you well enough to know that you're constantly putting yourself in new, uncertain situations, whether it be a new environment, a new business, putting trust in a new business partner. is something to this effect, something you've thought about, and how important is maintaining this surplus of new experiences important to you?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, it is the same perspective, just in a different. I look at it from a different light, right? So I just think about when I'm laying on my deathbed, will I be, happy that I stuck doing that, or that I went and did the things that I really wanted to do? So I worry more about like the time that I'm here. What am I supposed to be doing? Like,
Mhm.
why was I put here? What's the mark I'm supposed to leave on this world? And I don't want to wait until I'm, you know, 90, maybe 100. I'm shooting for 100. Um, 100, when I'm on my deathbed, and I start thinking about all the things I wish I would have done, right? Um, so I don't know if it's necessarily about new experiences per se, but it's just that I have some shit to do, and I have some people to inspire, and some people to help, and a mark, that a legacy that extends far beyond money, that I'm supposed to leave behind. I'm supposed to leave this place better than I found it.
Mhm.
And that encourages me to keep going. You said experience, right? So I said knowledge plus experience equals confidence. I think that at 38, you probably just start to get enough experience that you're ready to kind of go take some of those leaps and do the things that you maybe always wanted to do or waited to do. Um, I think that can also be the other way, though. People get so comfortable and set in their ways that they don't want to do it. So
Right. There's a fear to leave the comfort.
yeah, so it ultimately comes down to what we talked about, which is just this constant like callousing of your mind, and this desire to try to get out of your comfort zone early and often.
Mhm.
And so the more regularly that you can do that, the higher the probability that you're gonna continue to push on until you're old and can't do it anymore.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question, but
I honestly don't even know what I asked. No. No, I just knew you would be a great person to address that with. It's something like I said, I wrote down a while ago, and I've been holding on to it because I've just always appreciated the way you think.
Thank you.
And as soon as you started talking and said I should have a different perspective, I was like, fantastic. That's why I wanted to hear from you, because I knew you would supply something that I hadn't before thought of.
I think you're doing it right now, right? So you're doing something that you've wanted to do for a long time. How long did it take you? How long did you think about a podcast before you decided to do it?
About 4.5 years.
Okay, right. So that's a prime example, right? And now you're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
This is the thing that's been on your heart that you're supposed to do. This is the mark that you're supposed to leave on the world, right? And every day that you're not doing that is a day that you're letting the world down with what your gift is, like the thing that you were put here to do.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so, like 2-3 years from now, you're going to say, damn, I should have done that 4 years earlier. Right.
Right.
So, I don't know, something else is going to come up a year from now, and you're supposed to do it. Like, just go do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's how I've always operated, in a calculated fashion.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
there's a reason that it's on your heart, like, go do it.
One thing that stuck with me is I heard he was a former wide receiver in the NFL, and he turned public or motivational speaker. Trent Shelton, maybe. Anyway, he said something. A cemetery is the wealthiest place in the world because there's so many unwrapped gifts.
Yep.
There's literally acres upon acres of people who did not pursue the gifts they were given.
Yep. 100%.
And I don't want to leave any unwrapped gifts, man.
Go all in on it, baby.
No, man, this has been amazing. Really, really great. I know a lot of our viewers got a lot of information out of this, a lot of perspective as well. Last thing, if you wouldn't mind, I know there's going to be a couple people at least who want to continue to follow you and keep up with you. Would you mind just sharing your personal Instagram account? So if they want to do that, then give you a follow.
Instagram is Samson.Jagoras. That's SAMSON.JAGORAS. LinkedIn is also a great place to follow me if you want to learn more about real estate, investing. So I'm absolutely on the business side of things. It's going to be a great place for that. And Instagram is, I post just more fun stuff on that channel. So
you post some motivational stuff every now and then.
Yeah, I guess every now and again, too. So
depends on the day.
Yeah. And if you want to send me an email or you want to connect like one-on-one, you can always shoot me an email. Samson, SAMSON at thegrowthvue.com.
Perfect. Absolutely, man. Well, I know from experience, you are absolutely someone who will respond with what you think is the best thing if someone reaches out to you with advice or with questions. So I know that from personal experience. But thank you guys for coming back and tuning in again. Follow us on Instagram as well if you don't already to see clips of our time here with Samson, as well as see teaser trailers for upcoming guests. But thank you guys for coming in. And remember, no matter how hard you fail, keep failing forward.